I was far from home, and the spell of the eastern sea was upon me. In the twilight I could hear it pounding on the rocks, and I knew it lay just over the hill where the twisting willows writhed against the clearing sky and the first stars of the evening. And because my fathers had called me to the old town beyond, I pushed on through the shallow, new-fallen snow toward the very ancient town that I had never seen before, but I had often dreamt of. It was the Yuletide that men call Christmas, but they know in their hearts that it's older than Bethlehem and Babylon, older than Memphis and mankind. It was the Yuletide, and I had come at last to the ancient sea town where my people had dwelt and kept festival in the elder time, when festival was forbidden, and where they had now commanded their sons to keep festival still once a century, that the memory of primal secrets might not be forgotten. Mine were an old people, and were old even when this land was settled, but now they were scattered. Now they shared only the rituals of mysteries that none living could understand. I was the only one who came back that night to the old fishing town as legend bade, for only the poor and the lonely remember. And then, beyond the hill's crest, I saw Kingsport outspread frostily in the gloaming. Snowy Kingsport, with its ancient vanes and steeples, ridgepoles and chimney pots, wharves and small bridges, willow trees and graveyards, endless labyrinths of steep, narrow, crooked streets, and dizzy church-crowned central peak that time durst not touch. Ceaseless mazes of colonial houses, piled and scattered at all angles and levels like a child's disordered books. Beside the road, at its crest, a still higher summit rose, bleak and windswept, and I saw that it was a burying ground, where black gravestones stuck ghoulishly through the snow like the decayed fingernails of some gigantic corpse. The printless road was very lonely, and sometimes I thought I heard a distant, horrible creaking as if a gibbet was in the wind. As the road wound down the seaward slope, I listened for the merry sounds of a village at evening, but I did not hear them. And then I thought of the season and felt that perhaps these old Puritan folk might well have Christmas customs that were strange to me and full of silent hearthside prayer. So after that I did not listen for merriment or look for wayfarers, but kept on down past the hushed, lighted farmhouses and shadowy stone walls to where the signs of ancient shops and sea taverns creaked in the sea breeze, and the grotesque knockers of pillared doorways glistened along the deserted, unpaved lanes in the light of little curtained windows. I had seen maps of the old town, and I knew where to find the home of my people. It was told that I should be both known and welcomed, for the village legend lives on. And so I hastened through Back Street to Circle Court and then to Green Lane, where it leads up behind the market house. The old maps held good, and I had no trouble. And I was glad that I had chosen to walk, for the white village had seemed very beautiful from the hill. And now I was eager to knock at the door of my people, the 7th house on the left in Green Lane, with its ancient peaked roof. There were lights inside the house when I came upon it, and I saw from the diamond window panes that it must have been kept very close to its antique state. There was no sidewalk, but many houses had high doors that were reached by double flights of steps with iron railings. It was an odd scene, and because I was strange to New England, I had never seen its like before. And though it pleased me, I would have relished it better if there had been some footprints in the snow and people in the streets and a few windows without drawn curtains. When I sounded the archaic iron knocker, I was half afraid. Some fear had been gathering inside of me, perhaps because of the strangeness of my heritage and the bleakness of the evening and the queerness of the silence in that aged town of curious customs. And then when my knock was answered, I was fully afraid, because I had not heard any footsteps behind the door. And then it creaked open. But I was not afraid long, for the gowned, slippered old man in the doorway had a bland face which reassured me. And though he made signs that he was dumb, he wrote a quaint and ancient welcome with a stylus and tablet that he carried. He beckoned me into a low, candle-lit room with massive exposed rafters and a dark, stiff, sparse furniture. There was a cavernous fireplace and a spinning wheel at which a bent old woman in loose wrapper and deep poke bonnet sat with her back towards me, silently spinning despite the festive season. An indefinite dampness seemed upon the place, and I marveled that no fire should be blazing. I did not like everything that I saw, and felt again the fear that I had had. This fear grew that much stronger, for the more I looked at the old man's bland face, the more its very blandness terrified me. The eyes never moved, and the skin was too much like wax. And finally I was sure that it was not a face at all, but a fiendishly cunning mask, But then the flabby hands, curiously gloved, wrote genially on the tablet and told me that I must wait a while before I could be led to the place of festival. Pointing to a chair, table, and pile of books, the old man left the room, and when I sat down to read, I saw that the books were hoary and mouldy, and that they included old Marister's wild marvels of science, and the terrible Satacamus Triumphatus of Joseph Glanville, and worst of all, the unmentionable Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul Alhazred, a book that I had never seen before. Oh, but a book that I have heard the most monstrous things whispered about. No one spoke to me, but I could hear the creaking of signs in the wind outside and the whir of the wheel as the old bonneted lady continued her silent spinning and spinning. I thought the room and the books and the people very morbid and disquieting, but because an old tradition of my father's had summoned me to strange feastings, I resolved to expect queer things. And so I tried to read, and soon I became tremblingly absorbed by something I found in that accursed Necronomicon. A thought and a legend too hideous for sanity or consciousness. I was reading intently and shudderingly when the old man came back, booted and dressed in a loose antique costume, and sat. It was certainly nervous waiting, and the blasphemous book in my hands made it doubly so. When 11 o'clock struck, however, the old man stood up, glided to a massive carved chest in a corner, and got out 2 hooded cloaks, one of which he donned, and the other which he draped around the old woman, who was now ceasing her monotonous spinning. And then they both started for the outer door, the woman lamely creeping, and the old man, after picking up the very book that I had been reading, beckoning me as he drew his hood over that unmoving face or mask. We went out into the moonless, torturous network of that incredibly ancient town. Went out as the lights in the curtained windows disappeared one by one, and the dog star leered at the throng of cowled, cloaked figures that poured silently from every doorway and formed monstrous processions up this street and that, gliding across open courts and churchyards where the bobbing lanterns made drunken constellations. Amid these hushed throngs, I followed my voiceless guides, jostled by elbows that seemed preternaturally soft, and pushed by chests and stomachs that seemed abnormally pulpy, but never seeing a face and never hearing a word. Up and up the eerie columns slithered, and I saw that all the travelers were converging as they floored and flowed near the great white church. I had seen it from the road's crest when I looked at Kingsport in that new dusk. There was an open space around the church, partly a churchyard with spectral shafts, and partly a half-paved square swept nearly bare of snow by the wind. Death fires danced over the tombs, and revealing these gruesome vistas, though failing to cast any shadows. Past the churchyard, I could see over the hill summit and watch the glimmer of stars on the harbor, although the town itself was invisible in the dark. The throng was now slipping speechlessly into the church. I waited until the crowd had oozed into that black doorway and till all the stragglers had followed. The old man was pulling at my sleeve, but I was determined that I would be the last. And then I finally went, the sinister man and the old spinning woman before me. Crossing the threshold into that swarming temple of unknown darkness, I turned once to look at the outside world as the churchyard phosphorescence cast a sickly glow on the hilltop pavement. And as I did so, I shuddered. For, though the wind had not left much snow, a few patches did remain on the path. And in that fleeting backward look, it seemed to my troubled eyes that they bore no signs of passing feet. Not even mine. The church was scarce lighted by all the lanterns that had entered it, for most of the throng had already vanished. They had streamed up the aisle between the high white pews to the trapdoor of the vaults, which yawned loathsomely open just before the pulpit, and they were now squirming noiselessly into it. I followed dumbly down the foot-worn steps and into that dank, suffocating crypt. The tale of that sinuous line of night matches seemed very horrible, and as I saw them wriggling into a venerable tomb, they seemed more horrible still. And then I noticed the tomb's floor had an aperture down which the throng was sliding, and in a moment we were all descending an ominous staircase of rough-hewn stone, a narrow spiral staircase, damp and odorous, a staircase that wound endlessly down into the bowels of the hill, past monotonous walls of dripping stone blocks and crumbling mortar. It was a silent and shocking descent, and I observed after a horrible interval that the walls and steps were changing in nature, as if chiseled out of stone and solid rock. But what mainly troubled me was that the myriad footfalls, they made no sound, set up no echoes. After more aeons of descent, I saw some side passages or burrows leading from unknown recesses of blackness to this shaft of nighted mystery. Soon these became excessively numerous, like impious catacombs of nameless menace, and their pungent odor of decay grew quite unbearable. And I knew that we must have passed down through the mountain and beneath the earth of Kingsport itself. And I shivered that a town should be so aged and maggoty with subterraneous evil. Then I saw the lurid shimmering of pale light, and I heard the insidious lapping of sunless waters. And again I shivered, for I did not like the things that night had brought, and I wished bitterly that no forefather had summoned me to this primal rite. As the steps in the passage grew broader, I heard another sound, the thin, whining mockery of a feeble flute. And suddenly there spread out before me a boundless vista of an inner world, a vast fungus shore lit by a belching column of sick greenish flame and washed by a wide oily river that flowed from abysses frightful and unsuspected to join the blackest gulfs of immemorial ocean. Fainting and gasping, I looked at that unhallowed Erebus of titan toadstools and leprous fire and slimy water, and I saw the cloaked throngs forming a semicircle around this blazing pillar. Oh, this was indeed the Yule rite, older than man and fated to survive him, the primal rite of the solstice and of the spring's promise beyond the snows, the rite of fire and evergreen light and music. And in that Stygian grotto I saw them do the rite and adore this sick pillar of flame, and threw into the water handfuls gouged out of the viscous vegetation which glittered green. I saw this, and I saw some thing squatted far away from the light, piping away into the flute. And as that thing piped, I thought I heard noxious, muffled flutterings in the fetid darkness which I could not see. But what frightened me most was that flaming column, spouting volcanically from depths profound and inconceivable, and casting no shadows as a healthy flame should. For in all that seething combustion, no warmth lay, only the clamminess of death and corruption. The man who had brought me now squirmed to a point directly beside the hideous flame, and he made stiff ceremonial motions to the semicircle he faced. At certain stages of the ritual they did groveling tribute, especially when he held above his head that abhorrent Necronomicon that he had taken with him. And I shared in this tribute because I had been summoned to this festival by the writings of my forefathers. Then the old man made a signal to the half-seen flute player in the darkness. The player thereupon changed its feeble drone to a scarce louder drone in another key, precipitating as it did so a horror unthinkable and unexpected. At this horror I sank to the lichened earth, transfixed with a dread not of this nor of any world, but of the mad spaces between the stars. Out of that unimaginable blackness, beyond the gangrenous glare of that cold flame, there flopped rhythmically a horde of tame, trained, hybrid, winged things that no sound eye could ever wholly grasp or sound brain ever wholly remember. They were not altogether crows, nor moles, nor buzzards, or ants, nor vampire bats, nor decomposed human beings, but something I cannot and must not recall. They flopped limply along, half with their webbed feet and half with their membranous wings, and as they reached the throng of celebrants, the cowled figures seized and mounted them, and they rode off one by one along the reaches of that unlighted river and into pits and galleries of panic where poison springs feed frightful and undiscoverable cataracts. The old spinning woman had gone with the throng, and the old man remained only because I had refused when he motioned me to seize an animal and ride along with the rest. I saw when I staggered to my feet that the mysterious flute player had now rolled out of sight, but that two of the beasts were patiently standing by. As I hung back, the old man produced his stylus and tablet, and he wrote that he was the true deputy of my fathers, who had founded the Yule worship in this ancient place, that it had been decreed that I should come back, and that the most secret mysteries were still to be performed. He wrote this in a very ancient hand, and when still I hesitated, he pulled from his loose robe a seal ring and a watch, both bearing my family's arms, as if to prove he was what he said. But this was hideous proof, because I knew from old papers that that watch had been buried with my great, 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 great grandfather. Presently, the old man drew back his hood and pointed to the family resemblance in his face. But I only shuddered, because I was now sure that that face was merely a devilish waxen mask. And the flapping animals were now scratching restlessly at the lichens, and I saw that the old man was becoming restless himself. And then when one of the things began to waddle and edge away, he turned quickly to stop it, and that sudden motion dislodged that waxen mask from what should have been his head. And then I flung myself into the oily underground river that bubbled somewhere into the caves of the sea, flung myself into that putrescent juice of the earth's inner horrors before the madness of my screams could bring down upon me all the charnel legions these pest gulfs might conceal. At the hospital, they told me I had been found half frozen in Kingsport Harbor at dawn, clinging to a drifting spar that accident had sent to save me. They told me that I must have taken the wrong fork of the hill road the night before and fallen from the cliffs of orange point, a thing they deduced from footprints of mine they had found in the snow. And there was nothing that I could say. Because everything was wrong. Everything was wrong. With the broad window shewing a sea of roofs, which only 1 in 5 of which was ancient, and the sound of cars in the streets below. They insisted that this was Kingsport, and I could not deny it. When I went delirious upon hearing the hospital stood near the churchyard on Central Hill, they sent me to St. Mary's Hospital in Arkham, where I could have better care. And I liked it there. The doctors were broad-minded, and they even lent me their influence in obtaining a carefully sheltered copy of Alhazred's objectionable Necronomicon from the library of the Miskatonic University. They had said something about a psychosis and agreed that I had best get any harassing obsessions off of my mind. And so it was I read again that hideous chapter, and I shuddered doubly, because it was indeed not new to me. I had seen it before. Oh, let the footprints say what they might. Where it was, where I had seen it, all of this is best forgotten. There was no one in the waking hours, at least, who could remind me of it anyway. Oh, but my dreams, they are full of horror. And it's because of those phrases. I dare quote you just one paragraph. The nethermost caverns, wrote the mad Arab, are not for the fathoming of eyes that see, for their marvels are strange and terrific. Cursed the ground where dead thoughts live new and oddly bodied, and evil is the mind that is held by no head. Wisely it is said that happy is the tomb where no wizard hath lain, and happy the town at night whose wizards are all ashes. For it is of old rumour that the soul of the devil hastes, not from his charnel clay, but fats, and instructs the very worm that gnaws, till out of horrid corruption life springs. Great holes have been dug where earth's pores should suffice, and things have learned to walk that ought to crawl.